Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson, Timar, and today I'm joined by Randy Burrows of the Uncut Gems podcast and the good old Nicolò Grasso. As for my birthday, we break into Paul Schrader's First Reformed. Following the story of an aging New England preacher who is reckoning with his religion once he becomes confronted by the death of the biological world at the hands of human and global warming, the film questions how we can exist in a world that is dying due to our own hands and the powerlessness we can feel when faced with an enemy of great size. We all absolutely adore this film, and today I'm very excited to get into the reasons why we enjoy it. I will say I am still getting over a bit of a sickness, so if I sound a little bit off today, that is why. I was definitely struggling at some points of this recording, but without further ado, let's get into our review of Paul Schrader's First Reformed. Okay, friends, and for our first episode of my 2 birthday episodes, we are finally diving into Paul Schrader's First Reformed. Nick, we covered O Canada here on the podcast last year, as well as Cat People. I know that on a first viewing, you weren't necessarily the hugest fan of First Reformed. This is your first time rewatching it since then, so I'm very curious. We're going to start over with you. What are your opening thoughts on Paul Schrader's First Reformed?
I'm very happy to be here talking about First Reform because I think it's been almost a running gag between me and you since we met in 2020, early 2021. Where basically Carson, for people who don't know, really, really loves First Reformed. And up until today, literally today, I had only seen it once. And it was the first day of the Venice Film Festival in 2017, my first time ever attending it. I was ready to go watch Downsizing. I queued up 25 minutes to go watch Downsizing, and I found out at the door that I could actually not attend the screening because it was only for people with paid tickets, not for people with an accreditation. And so I was panicking with friends, and they were like, "There's one movie that's like starting in 2 minutes. If we run, we can maybe make it." Turns out the movie was First Reform. We were the last people to get into that screening, press screening at over like 8, 9 p.m. And we watched a movie shot in 4:3 aspect ratio on a giant screen with over 1,000 people in the audience in the second row on the far left side. Not the best viewing conditions, one might say, for a 2-hour religious drama. But even that being said, I did enjoy the first half back then. I wasn't a fan of the second half when it gets a bit more I don't know if I want to say pulpy, but a bit more, genre heavy, more in leaning with Schrader's sensibilities as a writer. But the movie stuck with me. And rewatching it today, I was shocked by how well I actually remembered it, which I can't say for movies that I watched like a month ago at this point. And I have to say now I really like this film. I almost love it. I still have a couple of issues with it, more so with the ending more than anything. But it has everything one wants out of Schrader. It actually helped him come out of this slump that he was in, whether it was a creative slump or just financial. It's very personal. I would say a creative slump for quite a few years with an increasingly amount of sloppy, schlocky films. But with First Reformed, he goes full Bresson, Diary of a Country Priest type. He is angry. Schrader is angry in this film. He's angry with the way we've been treating this world, with the way his generation has treated the world, with how little hope is felt nowadays. And yeah, I'm very excited to talk about it. I think there's a lot to dig into here. And yeah, I'd have to say, like, little thing, I do find it funny that Paul Schrader made this movie and now is full on into generative AI. So it's like, no, Paul, no. This show is very old. It's very, very old. But yeah, those are my opening thoughts.
Okay, we don't need to get into the Facebook comments today, okay? Let's just leave those at the door.
Okay.
It's like Thanksgiving with like your grandfather, like we don't need to talk about some things. Randy, what are your thoughts on First Reformed?
All right. So I didn't have nearly as interesting a first screening of this, but I did see this in theaters when it played. I saw it in the local art house cinema, and it sort of blew my mind. I thought, wow, this is really an interesting, quiet little film. And by the end, it's dark. And so, yeah, I was really on board with this when I saw this. And what was it, 2017? Is that when this was, I think? So, yeah, really liked it. And, my head at the time wasn't totally into doing, what are the best films of the year lists. So I think I'd sort of gotten away from that. But if I had, this would have been right up there. I really, really liked it. Sort of a pragmatic look at religion and the world, like the environmental themes are there. I guess because I went looking through. So the first time I saw this, I went, and I've seen it a couple times. So this, I think, is my third time that I've seen it. But I went back to my Letterboxd review, and I'm just going to read a section of this. I usually don't like to do this, but I think for some reason the words came to me okay when I was writing that review. So Toller, that's Ethan Hawke. Toller's counseling session starts himself on a path of questioning, self-doubt, extremist sympathizing. He questions spectrums, the spectrum of despair and hope, the spectrum of stewardship and pollution, the traditional and the trending, the disenfranchised and the belonging, and even big business commerce versus small market values. And he questions all of them in the context of how he and the rest of humanity serve God as stewards of his creation. As a result, the personal safety net, which his own ministry, so this is Toller, which his own ministry provides, seems to fray, and Toller breaks down physically, professionally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I find that this here just represents that Schrader has a lot of stuff that he wants to unpack, and it's all in here. And I find it fascinating. And every time I watch it, I get a little bit more out of it. So this time I'm watching it a little bit more through the lens of how Bulk Industries is in there, and how Bulk Industries has one foot in the sanctuary of the church, right? So I find that is sort of an interesting statement. So each time you watch this, I think there's a few more angles that you can sort of, really sort of focus on. And I think that Schrader has a lot on his mind. So it's a lot still, I think, of the angry man that's trying to deal with his personal crap. Like, that's all in here. The guy with the past that has all this baggage, so the taxi driver and the Bringing Out the Dead and all these other wonderful scripts that he's penned over the years, like these, the hardcores, like all this stuff is still sort of in the protagonist here. So that's cool. But this film, it doesn't sort of get too far into the genre stuff that, like in the way that hardcore sort of takes sort of a wild final act that doesn't really seem consistent. And something too, like, so this film turned me on to Ingmar Bergman's film Winter Light. I'd have to say that's the template, right? Like, the first 20 minutes of this sort of follow the first 45 minutes or so of that film. So, and I think there's a connection, not just between the films, but also between the filmmakers. Bergman, I think he was the son of a minister too, and he struggled with, the idea of religion, and how he was sort of spoon-fed and force-fed religion in his whole life. And that's sort of what the religious trilogy of Bergman's, I think, is about, to a point, is him wrestling those issues. And I think Schrader has the same background. If I'm not mistaken, the character, George C. Scott's character in Hardcore, was based on Schrader's own old man. So Schrader has the religious, the religious lifestyle versus, the reality of the world, like, and how he sort of had to sort of navigate that. That's built into Schrader, I think. And this here, as an elder statesman of cinema, I want to say in 2017, he's wrestling with that stuff that I think really goes back to probably his teen years and, early parts of his career. So I find that interesting as well. On top of the fact, it's an interesting topic, right? And in one way or another, maybe we don't all wrestle with it, but we all have to sort of figure out our own spirituality, what it means. And for some people, it's a real wrestling match, as I think it was with Schrader. So this stuff comes out in discussions about environmentalism, and I really like this connection of, self-care and self-pollution. Like, do we take care of ourselves? Like the way that Reverend Toller in this, he's doing things quite quietly, to himself, like the way he knows he has a stomach issue and he continues to drink, and he considers drinking Drano at the end, like just these types of, you know, self pollution and self versus self care, and that he's sort of throwing that against, you know, God's creation, you know, the environment. So I find this sort of a fascinating set of issues that Schrader brings here. I personally, I really like the ending, although I sort of wrestle with it in my head a bit, but I love wrestling with it in my head. So I think that's in part why it's value. So yeah, at the end of the day, I really, really, really adore this film. I love the stillness of this film, and, you know, the weird form choices. So yeah, I'm all in for First Reformed. I think it's just sort of a fantastic, quiet little piece of cinema, but you know, it speaks volumes. So that's me. I'll stop rambling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to hopefully sound like a broken record here, but like this is absolutely one of my favorite films of all time. I first watched it with like a double feature. I believe I first watched Hotel Artemis, and then I watched this, which is such a weird double
Bizarre.
feature. As you mentioned, Randy, like, and Schrader's always been, even past hardcore, but hardcore is a wonderful example of that. He's always used cinema to like battle and wrestle with the society around him, whether it was something good in society, whether it was a demon of society. That is Schrader. That has been Schrader. It's always been Schrader. It's always going to be Schrader. I don't think there's another film from him, and I've seen every single one of his features at this point, that hits the mark so poignantly, so empowering, like it's so powerful. As First Reformed, this is a stunningly sharp feature. The craft here is like remarkable. The cinematography is great, the visuals, the colors, all that is just like an artistic statement on the screen. I mean, it really is gorgeous to watch. But then everything here emotionally, everything here within this character, it's asking the largest questions you can living in the modern society of like, you see this destruction, you see all this, and how do you not just fall to despair? And you get a character who's stuck within that. When I think it goes into, and we'll get into the ending, I guess, because we have mixed opinions on the ending. It's quite a remarkable final statement on like, how can you live in a world where you are awake and you see everything that is happening around you, all these evils, killing the earth, killing yourself. You see this corruption, you see this false, religion, basically, where people are taking advantage for capitalistic gain. I also programmed this very clearly with political things happening this week. I figured a few months ago there'd be some political things that probably you could relate to. How do you live in a world that is just going down the drain, really? And how this film translates that into a statement on the power of love and the power of connection. I think it's cinema at its most poetic. I think Schrader really accomplishes a perfect feature here where he is wrestling with these giant questions. He has a takeaway, and along that journey, you get stunning performances. Ethan Hawke is fantastic here. You get some shocking moments. Again, the visual language of this film is remarkable. This is really one of the films that I'm like, in A24's entire filmography, because it was released at least in the States by A24, I think it's easily one of the strongest films from their lineup. I really am like deeply in love with the film. So I guess that would be my opening thoughts on the film. I am curious, though. Maybe we should jump into. Let's say, number one, spoilers open for this conversation. The film's been out for a number of years. I'm sure everyone has seen it. I'm really curious what you guys think about this ending. I'm very curious to get into your thoughts. And Nick, maybe if you want to go first, because I know you have some mixed thoughts on it.
Yeah, I remember like the first time I watched it, I was not expecting it to go into such an extremist direction with the character, and that's something that I think it's important to acknowledge as well. At least the way that I felt rewatching the film is that he's very much a flawed character. The way every Schrader character is not perfect, is never fully in the right. They are flawed men trying to do good. And in this film, like, I think there's a moment with I don't remember the actual name, like Cedric the Entertainer. What's his like actor name? um, who plays the chief pastor. I think that's or something close to that. He tells him, like, you're always living in the garden, like you're always deep into the darkness, you're always deep into just this self-flagellating behavior, which could be read as kind of like, oh, they just don't get him. But watching it, I was like, he's right. Like, this man has just internalized the pain of the world and is making it his responsibility to fix it or try to fix it. The famous quote, well, somebody has to do something. It's like, yeah, but it's everyone has to do something in a tiny, tiny way. And it's not through violence or extreme acts that you can actually achieve the change that you want. And so you get to the ending, which I like so much, the danger of it. The surprise of it, the slow build up, especially like rewatching it, is so gradual. You see him getting closer to this ideology of the environmentalists. You see him, being tempted. It is kind of like these temptations as well. If you want to say it as a fully like religious parable, you can look at it as the temptations of Jesus in the desert. Um, he's tempted by the suicide vest. He's tempted by just sending a message. Like you were saying, Randy, like the entire he feels guilty that most of the money that they have comes from this evil organization that's helping destroy their part of the world. That's doing the devil's work, if you want to put it like that. And so you get to this ending, which is powerful. I like the idea of him not wanting to go through because he sees the woman, Amanda Seyfried, Mary, also Mary, by the way, in terms of names choices. Um, he sees her and he doesn't want to go through, and he still has to take it out on someone, and so he takes it out on himself. Whether we'll actually go to the congregation or not, having drank the fluid, if he actually went through with it, who knows? Um,
He drops it, doesn't he? I think he drops
he
it.
drops it. No, he does drop
Yep.
it. No, I was like, maybe if he actually went out there, who knows what it would have happened? But he covers himself in barbed wire, which is brutal, but it's the best way for him to feel something. Throughout the movie, he's very, from the moment you meet him, he's like, gentle, kind, nice, but very apathetic. The strongest emotions that you see him show are just pain when he's urinating blood. And in that moment, it does feel like he's just desperate for emotions, desperate for feeling. And yeah, in the end, he finds, he embraces true love, he embraces happiness. I get what Schrader is going for. I think I like the endings of his next movies, which are pretty much the same thing, but I like them more in execution. It doesn't feel earned. I even rewatching it this time, like, I just don't really see this relationship blossoming on screen. And in a way, I wish he left it less romantic and less sexual in nature, and made it more spiritual, I guess you could say. That's like my main problem. I know I spent so much time setting up the context, but just to emphasize, I like what he's saying. I just don't like the how. Just like those final shots. It feels a bit weird. I don't know how you feel, maybe, Randy.
No, I really like the ending. I totally take your comment about so it does end with an embrace, and the camera, which has barely moved the whole film, starts swirling around Amanda Seyfried and Ethan Hawke, and they're not just embracing, and they're passionately kissing. So like he does have this connection, and it's clear that connection is sort of a big part of this ending. I can totally take the point of, do we need it to be romantic in this sense? And I can put a pin in that. Maybe if it's just an embrace may do the same thing for me. And if I were to nitpick, that might be the only thing I have. But for the most part, I find that this ending, it happens on sort of a thematic plane, right? So because I also, like, as this washes over me, this film is like, why would he wrap himself in barbed wire? Like it just seems like a series of weird choices. But as I wrestle with this ending in my head, here's a guy who is slowly, he's slowly, not, yeah, I guess becoming an extremist, like, because he's starting to see the depths that one would go and what the absolute tail end of the spectrum, which is despair, looks like. And it looks like I'm going to suffer because then I'm feeling something. I'm feeling something physical. It's like if something is really bothering you and they say, bite your tongue, or, pinch yourself. So you distract yourself with a physical, like a physical embodiment of pain. So, what someone who's really annoying is saying doesn't get to you as much. Right. So, but this is sort of what he is. So he's into self-harm, and he's also on the cusp of, wearing the suicide vest and, taking out, some of these industry and political leaders who have done nothing to, to help with, save the environment and to, work to protect God's creation. So like there's these elements, but like, so this is the despair end of things. And meanwhile, like, so he pours that drink of Drano and he's just about to consume that as well. And that's when Amanda Seyfried enters. And I think then she is the other extremist end of that spectrum, which is hope. So like back to one of the best scenes to me in the whole film is around 15 minutes in or so. He meets the Michael character. So Reverend Toller meets Michael. So Amanda Seyfried's husband, who has, he's a protester, and he's got these extreme views, and he's feeling despair and hopelessness just from on the environmental perspective. And then something that comes out of that conversation, where's the line? I have it here. Because even though through this conversation, I think Reverend Toller is slowly becoming indoctrinated himself and he's seeing the hopelessness, he responds by saying, courage is the solution to despair. And I think it's a fantastic line. And that's one that I can sort of take away and I can ponder and could probably sort of incorporate into my own belief structure. Like that makes sense. When the going gets tough, what do? The tough get going. Well, what's that mean? You gotta sort of man up and face it, or strong woman up and face it. Shouldn't just throw those terms around, but you have to show a spine and you have to, stand up for what's right. And so, courage is the response to this. But at the same time, it's not necessarily that Reverend Toller is showing courage at the end, but what I'm wrestling with sort of the finale is sort of the ends of the spectrum, right? So, and one is despair, and then when she comes in, it's hope. So when they embrace and they start kissing, like this is hope, because as a man in solitude, here he's got a human connection, and like similarly, this has to happen, spiritually. Like people have to get connected to, God's creation. I sort of like making environmentalism into sort of a spiritual discussion that's uniquely articulated, and just like when he posts the picture, when he posts the words on the sign, will God forgive us? Looks like an interesting message for this week's sermon. Sure. But you know what? Like there's a lot of heft to it. Really. So yeah, the ending to me is, does it really happen? Because I think there's some arguments out there and that, oh, well, it's, he's actually dead, or like he actually dies and doesn't go through with it. And like, there's these theories, right? But for me, it's not how I take it. As the ending washes over me, yeah, it does have sort of an odd flair to it. But at the same time, I think it's wrestling with the thematics, and what I see is that conversation, and I think it's rich, and I think it ends to a point on a high because it's saying, hope is the opposite of despair, and there's courage that's part of that. Like it harkens back to that discussion that he has with Michael. So I, for one, really like the ending, although anyone who's a little bit more of a being like, I couldn't watch this with people like friends of mine. That ending is stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Like, what? Why would anyone no, I think someone has to be open-minded to the, what's going on. And I think we see Schrader wrestling with his multitude of themes here, the corporate versus the society values type of thing, corporate values versus society values, like this type of stuff. It's all on display in that ending. So it gives me a lot to gnaw on, and I really appreciate that. But if someone were to say, well, does he really do it? And this is just happening, just sort of like he's actually dead, and this is sort of being welcomed into heaven, or one of these takes. I don't know. Like, I'm not really prepared to bite into that, but I love that this ending can exist in that way. Like, the fact that someone is thinking about this stuff at the tail end is fantastic to me. So
No, I agree with that. And I think there's a lot here at the ending as far as symbolism. I mean, you have the barbed wire, and then you think of Jesus's like crown of thorns. Like, there's a lot there to get into. I find it curious because I don't necessarily. I think hope is an interesting conversation throughout the film, right? Because like he has that conversation earlier where he talks about how humanity always wakes up in the darkness, and how you have to have faith that humanity is going to wake up when it has to save our lives, and then that gets met with stats and with experts saying it's too late, like it's happening, like we can't just stop all this disaster that's on our horizon. I found it much more not so much hope as far as like we're gonna solve these big issues, but rather I think it's hope that we can all live our personal lives. We can't fix these big issues that are not on us, but this is a way forward for us to live and find happiness and find positivity against all that. I don't see a lot of hope, I guess, for like um, the larger demons that Schrader's wrestling with, but like we can't stop the world from burning, but the world can burn, and you can hold someone in your arms and have a much more positive experience, I guess. I've always thought it was a rather bold ending that the focus shifts from trying to make a statement. I mean, obviously he's going to is considering blowing up this church, to salvation, to saving yourself, to saving those around you, for holding love close to you. I always found that to be beautifully poetic, a little bit sad, I guess you could read, but like, I've always found that to be really powerful for me towards the end of this. But it's undeniably rich. I mean, the fact that we can have this conversation, like you mentioned, Randy, and I know there's a bunch of other takes online, and I'd love to hear anyone who's listening to this today, hear your takes on it. But it's super rich, and I think that bleeds into the rest of the feature. I know we kind of started at the end here, but like, there are so many little scenes when they are embracing and they start to float, and I think that sequence is gorgeous. It's a film that is so controlled and so grounded that when Schrader embraces something that feels more artistic or more large scale like that, I think it always hits wonderfully. I don't know if there was any sequences that stood out to you guys throughout this.
I think for sure what Randy mentioned was stand out in this rewatch was the scene with Michael. That entire dialogue is just woof. Like, I could watch a movie that's just that. Which I also think it's kind of a remnant of Bergman, which I can respect. Like, I always like this thing about Schrader, that he's not afraid of making unofficial remakes of other people's works, which is endearing. I find it very endearing, and even the entire discovery of the corpse is just haunting. One of the most disturbing bodies maybe you could see in a movie. You just feel the anguish in that character's death, as well as I found her very interesting. It is a character that I don't think is fully important to the narrative. Maybe more a remnant from Bergman's film Winter Light, but the leader of the choir, female leader of the church choir, the thing that I like about her is that she's also a reminder once again that this is a man who is very flawed because he treats her like garbage throughout the entire movie. This one, you find out that after he divorced his wife because they lost their child, he became a priest. And if I'm not mistaken, they're Protestants, right? So like marriage and everything is okay, it's fine. But he had a tryst with this woman, maybe just once. It meant nothing to him. It meant everything to her, of course. And it is very sad to just see how he keeps dismissing the people around him. He keeps refusing any type of connection, is very bitter, is very cynical, and you see that throughout the entire movie, even from the beginning before he meets Michael. He's not in a good place. And when he's having those nice conversations, it's not him that's talking, but it's the priest. It's the different persona. These are the things I have to say. And I'll say last scene that actually stood out to me rewatching it is the moment towards the end before the climax when there's this little group of children, probably from Sunday Mass or something, from Sunday school, sorry, or something like that, that are visiting the temple, the first Reformed church, and the Toller shows them the underground, like the
Mhm.
hiding spot for people who undertook the Underground Railroad, and again, it's showing how he's living constantly in that garden of despair. How something that he probably did so many times because he's just going through the motions. You can tell he's done this before with children. It works. It's impactful. He said these things many times, but this is the first time where he actually, or at least that's how it feels. It's like the first time he is actually truly understanding what happened, which is something that sometimes can be taken for granted. I take it for granted sometimes. I remember back home we had so many school trips to places where tragedies happened, concentration camps, and things like that. And it can be easy to just hear the words and
Mhm.
not actually feel the reality and the impact of what happened. And in that moment, there's just like this. I don't remember if it's like static camera, maybe it's just a tiny, tiny zoom on his face, but you get this intense close up of him where it just transitions from the smiling, like, yeah, you can imagine like the people living here, yeah, just hiding underground. And then it dawns on him, like they're down there and just hearing the footsteps of the slavers outside, knowing, just praying for God to save them. And it's haunting. It's haunting. There's so many moments like that that are just so impactful. But that one really stood out to me on this viewing.
That's a good one. I and also too, just the shout out to that part of American history with the Underground Railroad, like that even sort of harkens back to the conversation with Michael, where uh, Michael and Toller talk about the darkness, right, and just sort of this depression, really.
Hmm.
And he said like the darkness has always been there. There have been dark times, and the Underground Railroad was a symbol of hope. So it even sort of is a nicely written in piece to that theme, despair and hope being a spectrum. So yeah, no, it's a fantastic shout out. Yeah, for me in terms of big scenes, I like totally floored the dialogue, and for it to be just like a simple sort of cut back and forth between two gentlemen talking, but that scene where Michael and Reverend Toller, they talk to one another, and Michael just talks about how hopeless things have gotten, and just sort of the world of environment protections, and just the hopelessness. Um, Amazing. And there's a line here where Toller says like it's a voiceover piece, and usually the voiceovers don't easily sell me, but it works so well here. And he adds a commentary to that scene just through this voiceover, and he's saying that like he wrestled. I think the word wrestle is in there, but like he wrestled with these ideas that Michael was throwing at him, and he hadn't felt that alive in a long time. So like this is saying that this sort of awakened something in him, because he'd been numb since his son died and his wife left him, and he has guilt over both. Like for him, I think if you dig deep, like a lot of this is guilt, because he suggested that his son sign up to go to the to go into the military, and then he ends up being part of whatever, the war on terror or the Iraq war, one or the other, and he doesn't come back, and I'm sure he bears so much guilt because he got him to sign up for the services, and that's for a war. And then he goes and says, for a war that made no sense. Like, so there's no reason for him to be here. And he would have guilt over his, wife leaving. And he has guilt over the tryst he had with Esther, the choir director. Like, oh, it didn't work out. And like, that's something that he's a jerk, to her, because, he feels so much guilt and self-loathing over it. So, there's just so much in that scene that is tapped into that dialogue scene. It's just so good. Um, so over at Uncut Gems, we're watching some Mike Nichols stuff, right? And just to find some stuff that would work really well on stage, like The Graduate or Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So to really, to see sort of powerfully written dialogue, because dialogue is one of the last things that I would indicate as a real weapon and tool of cinema. But here it is. Oftentimes, there's too much dialogue or, too much scripting, but here it's poignant, it's powerful, it leads right into the character development, and, the performances are profound. Another scene I really like, it's just a small bit, but I sort of had my radar sort of tuned into the mega church thing. And Reverend Toller goes and helps with a youth group. And they're sort of going around, and there's this one kid, oh, amen, praise the Lord, like life is so good, and this happened to me, and I can only think that that's God smiling down on me. Yeah, woo. Like he's just amazing. And then there's this young guy who's leading the thing, who works with Abundant Church, and he's a cool young Christian. He's got tattoos up the side of his arm, and then one lady says, again, another youth, she's like, my dad's struggling. He's been unemployed for a couple months. He's working really hard to find a job, and he's found nothing, and the family's struggling. And so what I see in this is the big church. So this young youth pastor who's dealing with it, he says, hey, Reverend Toller, why don't you handle that? Because that's sort of the bad news story, right? And we're all about, let's rally.
Don't be a downer.
Yeah. And then Reverend Toller does respond to that with a very empathetic, caring, thoughtful reply. And then there's another kid in the group. Oh, so you're saying that Jesus is for losers and Christians don't deserve wealth? And it was just eye-opening too. And I think that there's sort of a comment in here about how locked in and polarized some people are with their views, because like, as I took it, now maybe I'm just sort of like-minded, but I took his response, Toller's response, the Reverend's response, as one that, because he made the comment about, Jesus had his messaging, Jesus spoke to the poor, Jesus spoke to the wealthy, Jesus' pulpit did not have dollar signs on it, did not have an American flag on it. Like, he tried to it was about connection. Oh, were you saying that we can't be successful? Like, I think that there's sort of an astute observation in there. And that sort of jumped out to me. And then it dawned on me that, and the point here is the big mega church who's handling all the money. And they've got these cool, hip youth pastors with the tattoos up their arm, and they conduct their business in t-shirts and jeans. And they're so freaking cool talking to the kids. They don't handle the tough questions. And then Reverend Toller sort of gets put on the spot for dealing with a hard issue, because that young lady had a hardship at home, and she was legitimately concerned for her family and her father. Good question. Where's God's role in that? Oh, well, we don't talk about the downer stuff. Why don't you handle that? I thought that was just sort of eye-opening and astute in a way, on how attitudes and commerce comes into it too. By the time you sort of get into the bulk industries involvement, and they're funding the reconsecration of this historic church. But I think there's a lot in here about how mega churches have become businesses in their own right. And I think, and that sort of fascinates me. And I think there's some astute observations in there about that. Like so as the treasurer of a church myself, like I once, like 10 years ago, I thought, oh, I know how, because, money is always tight in organizations, right? So this small church, I proposed jokingly, what we should do? We should just get a big corporate sponsor for the sanctuary. So every time you go into church on Sunday morning, this is the Irving Industries, United Church Sanctuary. And anyway, I did it for a laugh line, but here at the end, there's a big sign over the church, and it's got Bulk Industries right on the sign. And so this type of, creep and penetration into spiritual lives and into sort of what should be moral issues, that space is being intruded on by big businesses because there's some sort of opportunity there, which is disgusting. And of all weeks, so this is being recorded the week of Trump's first week in office, round 2. But this whole idea of our moral space, our spiritual space, our ethical space, just our day-to-day, personal values is being crept into by these influential people with alternative agendas. So that's sort of shocking here. So that turned into a ramble based on a small scene, but the theme is big and throughout in the film.
I mean, that's also echoed when he goes and has lunch with them at the diner, I want to say,
Absolutely.
or coffee or something. Yep. I love that scene. I think that's a great... He has a monologue where he says, the quietest men always seem like the smartest there. And he's just desperately trying to bring up these issues, and they cannot even get past, like, why would you allow this dead man's final wishes to be honored? Because that's kind of political. I mean, it's hauntingly frustrating, and I think that's something that we're obviously, again, seeing very relevantly in politics now. It is something that, it's difficult to put words to. It's difficult to wrestle with, like, the sense of powerlessness that you feel when you look at movements on that level, and then you're like, well, what can we do? What can... And I guess then you get into the point in the film, as we talked about. But yeah, agree. I think the dinner scene or the lunch scene, I always really appreciated also. I feel like this one's kind of like, it's a little simplistic, I guess, but like, yeah, it's a really great film, right? Like, I think there's a lot, it's a pretty simplistic conversation to have, just because like it is wrestling with all these things. But I think also, to the credit of the film, like, it's really digestible. It's really easy to go in here and have these conversations. It's not one, and maybe this is why. I mean, obviously, I think this is easily Schrader's most popular film of all time. It is not one where you have to... See, I disagree, because I think that it is so digestible, and it's such a easy style to have that conversation with, that like I get why, and that doesn't reduce what it does, because it's doing, I think, phenomenal things. But I think this is one where I see how it's really welcoming to people to have a conversation with, and it's a great kind of easy showcase, like compared to Master Gardener, compared to Card Counter, even compared to Oh Canada, certainly, and compared to a lot of his older stuff. This is not one where you necessarily have to battle with the film to get its meaning and to get its understanding. I think it's one that presents it in a really well way, but I think also, again, that's good. I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah. I do have a theory about the film's success, and I think it's the A24 factor. I think this came out around the time where A24 was starting to sell itself as a brand. Because the actual wide release, if I'm not mistaken, was actually in 2018 in the States, right? Because I remember I was confused when it got nominated for Best Screenplay, which, again, surprising. Great. Surprising. And it was the same year where they also had Hereditary, they had Lady Bird prior year, like all those movies that were making them feel like this more established brand. I hated it so much that I had that thought, like watching the movie. I was like, it kind of does have that A24 look, It's like the static shots. It's all very haunting, 4:3 aspect ratio, going a bit desaturated with the cinematography, color correction, just those little things. It's like, I hate it so much. Like, it's become such a part of our culture, when I think the movie is so much more than just that. But I definitely think it helped. Like, I have vague memories of when it actually came out. I remember it was more popular than I expected, but I think maybe that played a part in it.
A lot of word of mouth probably involved too. But I love that you mentioned the look of this, Nico, because I find it very muted, but I really like it. And it's very, very specific choices, like with the the 4:3 aspect ratio, and it seems like everything's a cloudy day, even though you can tell it's sort of sunny. And I think this is sort of probably it's playing a little bit with the sort of the despair spectrum, and how do I make this look a little bit more gloomy. I think that's part of it. I think a lot of this is lovingly attributable to Bergman too, in a way, just because of the source material. So, but Carson, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too, because you spoke of loving the cinematography too. So, what are other pieces of it that sort of stood out to you, just because you love the look so much? But I would say, like, I do too, but it's sort of a drab affair in a way.
For sure. I mean, I would not say this is like cinematography that's like, oh, how exciting and bright, and there's not a lot of movement even. It's a lot of static shots, or if shots do move, it's very conservative in its movement. It is probably one of the more precise films as far as using its frame that I can remember, from the opening scene where this church just slowly takes over the entire frame, to there are certain sequences where it will frame itself to where characters in their movement, it doesn't actually have to move the camera to capture where they're going, or they'll just let them go off screen even. Like, it's a very precise film with its cinematography. It's the same guy who did Card Counter, Master Gardener, and also did the Goodnight Mommy remake, which is a random one in that list. But no, I mean, I think it's intoxicating almost. I mean, it's definitely, again, dark. And the entire film, like visually, just color spectrum wise, is dark. But then you get these little purples and you get the little pinks, especially when it comes to the night sky, or it comes with nature. That's really where the color tends to pop in. And I think it's just very, very effective. I think it's just, I mean, even just these cold, old wooden houses that they go to have conversations in, and you get the creaks of the wood. The environment here, I think, is super. It's cold, but it's seductive in a way that, like, I think the visual language here is something like I could always throw this on and just get sucked into the world, and I think it helps. It has that like New England charm in a sense. That I really appreciate, for sure. Yeah.
This is set near Washington, like East Coast, right? That's the setting. They mentioned Washington at some point, but I didn't really properly look up. Okay. I found it interesting. I watched the behind the scenes featurette. It's like a 15-minute making of documentary. There's a couple of fun discoveries that I didn't know about the movie. The one that appealed to me the most was that, because Schrader, one thing that I like about Schrader is that it never feels like he's making the movie of a lifetime. By that I mean, like, it never feels like he's sitting down and like, this is a story I had for so long in me. It always feels like he just kind of like woke up and I was like, I have an idea, just like writes it down and makes it. And basically he made this movie after talking with Pavel Pawlikowski, the director of Ida, or Ida, as the Americans say, the Polish film from 2015. And he basically was like, ooh, crisis of faith. Ooh, 4:3 aspect ratio is really good framing. Ooh, not moving the camera can also really work. You know what? I always talked about transcendental cinema in my youth. I can actually make a movie like that now. And that's why he made this. I was like, oh, the world is going to shit. Like, it's so beautiful in a way. Just like the way he conceives these ideas.
But
one thing is super unique in his filmography. Like, you mentioned, Nick, like before this, he was making The Canyons and Dog Eat Dog.
Oh,
like,
God.
Just definitely films that are not at all on this level of filmmaking, or not all on this level of like technical craft. He did have it in mind that this could be his last feature. So I'm sure that adds, some gravitas to the experience of making it and just what you want out of the film. But it is a big shift for him.
It is. I think he played to the strengths of the budget, which he didn't do with those other movies. Like, you watch, like, I don't want to say that this movie feels cheap, but it is a cheap film. It was like $2-3 million. It's so crazy. Because I realized there was also the director's commentary, and I wish I watched the movie like that. Maybe a rewatch can help. But I ended up rewatching like the last 15 minutes with the director's commentary, and it was like, yeah, this scene in the church, we had to fill it up with extras. Extras are expensive. We thought of alternatives, of ways of not having them there. It's like, but you can't fake it. I was like, damn, like, to the point where they were like, we can't afford to have 50 people in a church or so, something like that. It was cheap, but it works. Like the style benefited the limitations.
In some ways, too, I would say that this does go back to a lot of, Schraderisms. So he might have sort of new ideas that he wants to hit, but he will often go back to this sullen dude who is stressed and has all this pent up anger. Like it's in a lot of his scripts in particular. Like if you go back to the Taxi Drivers and the Hardcores and the Rolling Thunders and the Bringing Out the Deads, like, and he only directed Hardcore out of that. But a lot of these, this angry man who writes a diary thing, like he's fallen to that quite a bit. And but he uses that as sort of a launch pad for like here environmentalism and marrying that up to a bit of crisis of faith. It's not as much the crisis of faith thing as maybe Winter Light is, sort of on a personal level, but that's in here as well. But like that's sort of one go-to that is a bit reliable for him, is the man who doesn't say much, but he feels a lot and he just sort of pushes it down until he's a powder keg of emotion. So that's a piece in here too that is a Schraderism, I would say.
I will say in their monetization of this, because A24 did a huge like they sold hats. They had a whole try to push a social media challenge of making the drink concoction, which is very like odd.
Drano?
No,
Nice.
the Pepto-Bismol and whiskey. Yeah.
No, I don't think they encourage people to Drano. Hopefully not. But I'm shocked they never sold a journal for this. I would have definitely bought it. But
It's an underrated piece of merch. Write your own thoughts like the character does.
I think the monologue, like the journal, is a good way to get his thoughts out there. I think normally that choice would bother me from a narrative level, especially with how often it goes back to that and how often it's used. Films, I think we all appreciate a show versus tell mindset as far as filmmaking, but with his inner thoughts, I thought that always worked well. Mm-hmm. So
this is a film that's so much about the internal, right? As with so many of Schrader's protagonists are, right? It's like guys coming back from Vietnam and they've got all these, the hate and they don't know what to do with it, and they've got all these so there's a lot that, and Schrader seems to know oftentimes, well, this character wouldn't just sort of, oh, well, I feel this way because I was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 7 years. Like he doesn't articulate this through the dialogue of the character, right? So this is a tool that he uses, and it's really effective here. So I agree with you, Carson, that it's not always. But here it's employed great because this is a film about what's going on beneath the surface, what's going on in the heart and the soul, not even the mind, the heart and the soul. And how do you get that out? And the diary is a tool to help with that. So yeah, I'm on board with the diary use here.
Well, I think maybe we're starting to wrap up on the film. Maybe if we want to go around, is there any other thoughts that we have or things we would like to get into before we close up? Randy?
I'd be curious just to talk about the magical mystery tour scene, sort of the body on body meditation scene, and because this here I remember seeing this in the cinemas, and again, if you just sort of watch this literally, there's a little bit of a WTF is going on here, but again, once you start thinking about the conversations that Schrader is having with this script, I think this totally works. This is about connection, and it's about connection between people, but it's also the spiritual connection between humanity and the environment. So, and this is one of the more significant points where the camera moves, right? There's a couple soft little moves here and there, but mostly it's completely static. But here, you've got these, helicopter or glider shots going over different scenes, and it feels a lot like manufactured landscapes. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that documentary. Yeah, beautiful. It's really yeah. It's just a lot of camera coverage of beautiful photography, but it's usually showing how humanity has sort of assed up this part of the world's geography. So we've got that sort of approach here with this camera sort of gliding through what begins as, beauty and creation, but then, you sort of get the idea. No, this is about, it's spiritual. It's about, our connection to the land we have, and there's a spiritual piece to it, and it's just sort of really powerfully portrayed, like this environmentalism and spiritualism. I never really thought of the two, but Schrader sort of makes this connection here, and then it glides over, acres and acres of tires and burning land and rainforest degradation. So it's and it's something that, oh, why are these two people floating? That's weird. And it is weird, but it totally works. And at one point, so you just got this sort of awkward Amanda Seyfried lying sort of face down, but then you see Ethan Hawke peek out from under her hair at one point. Peek. But I think like that's his connection, where he's like, yeah, like this is what's happening to the earth. And it's just sort of, it's further entrenching him in, well, I have a voice at the front of the pulpit and I've got to use it. So I think it's shortly after that he changes the sign. Will God forgive us? Like for his next sermon, like, and then he becomes a little bit more radicalized. So I think it's powerful stuff, but it's all part of does it really happen? Like, no, I think this is sort of the thematic part. This is the part of the film that happens in your head. And, but it's really fantastic and moving.
Yeah, it's very telling who's watching movies with their eyes and who's watching them with their hearts. I got a comment from someone on my review. It was like, I wish he used generative AI for the green screen because the effect is terrible. It's like, if that's what you're left with after that scene, just
why didn't they do it?
Sure,
give it a kiss.
Sure. Just bizarre. Yeah.
But I love that this film has this scene and doesn't go anywhere where you might feel it's going to, just by people's IQ of watching films. Like it goes in its own place. It goes in the place of the artist's choice, and I love that.
I will say it's definitely jarring. Like the first viewing of this definitely stood out. Maybe not necessarily the most positive of ways, but once you think about it, like you mentioned, Randy, and that's something that Schrader has, especially in this newer trilogy, I guess you could say. Like there's always a moment, every single one of the films, where connection, he tries to showcase the power of that through this big grand artistic scene. Master Gardener, they have that scene where like they drive through and there's all the flowers and it's like, yeah, it's really beautiful. That is definitely a Schraderism, but I will say for a film that is so conservative and grounded up to that point, I can definitely see how someone could on a first viewing be like, what the fuck was that? That's crazy. But I think it works beautifully.
And it is very digital. Now we're not going to touch on the generative AI potential future of Schrader, but one thing I commend about him is that, also because of a necessity, but he was never afraid of embracing the new technologies to make the most of his films, and maybe even try to elevate them, which is something I find is so frustrating. I get why, even like with the short film I'm working on right now, we ended up going for some light film emulation elements to have some extra textures, some extra layers. But I really respect Schrader for being like, I don't want that. Like, we shot this movie with a very cheap ARRI, we shot the others similarly. It's like, it's a digital looking film. Let's just make it look like a digital. And embracing, in this instance, like you mentioned, the green screen or the flowers in that movie, or like the Las Vegas the garden of electric trees in the card counter, like all those moments. I'm like, sure, man, like go for it. I respect it way more than, even though it's great anime, something like Joker. It's like we're trying to make it look as close to 70mm or 35mm as possible. It's like either shooting that format or not. Like always trying to faking the film look. Don't be ashamed. And I think that's why it's also jarring, because the entire movie already has this overly digital feel to it, which you maybe don't get on a mental level, but you just feel it. It's always there. So to also have like this complete green screen effect, which is not even green screen. Like they basically just rotoscoped out the actors because the beginning of the location is the same. So it's even more complicated than that. I don't want to know how fucking painful this must have been for the artists working on that scene. But it works. I think, especially on a rewatch, once you know it is coming, you're so into the relationship of the characters. You already know what's going to happen. You can let this moment wash over you in a more satisfying way. And like you said, Randy, like the little moment where you just have these beautiful shots of nature, and once the camera looks over Amanda Seyfried's shoulder and you see Ethan Hawke's face, they are starting then to go over like this cemetery of tires and like the polluted ocean and everything, and it's disturbing, it's upsetting. Also, again, one of very few camera movements in the entire film. Um, it's a moment that definitely grew on me over the years.
Absolutely. Nick, did you have anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up today?
Oh, I would like to honestly just maybe Amanda Seyfried, because I know we celebrated Ethan Hawke, but I always enjoyed her up to a point. I thought she was very dangerously close to being typecast between the late 2000s, early 2010s. But with this film, it does feel like she entered a new era. Also, coincidentally, when she was cast, this was funny watching the behind the scenes documentary. Um, she told Schrader she was pregnant, and he wrote that element into the script. And he also used it as a way of pushing the financiers to actually give them money and make them shoot the film. Because he was like, you want the big name actor to sell your movie? We have her. On February 6th, she can't work anymore. So let's get moving. Let's get moving. Give me that money. And it worked. It worked. And I think she brings a level of just I don't know. She's so genuine in this. She's so lovable and heartfelt. So many heartfelt moments, especially this one of the floating, like the vulnerability of being like, I needed help. I came to you. This thing used to help me when I was with my husband. Can we do it again? Just this lying down and facing each other. And yeah, I think she deserves the extra mention.
Yeah, I mean, I think this entire ensemble is really good. The only one that bothers me is the one that looks like James Cameron, just because it looks like James Cameron.
Yes, the organ player.
The
organist.
Now it does. But other than that, I think this entire, I mean, Cedric the Entertainer, I think is like really, really fantastic here in a really like small supporting role.
Yeah.
You know, I think obviously Seyfried is fantastic, and shout out, you know, obviously I'm a fan of her work. And Ethan Hawke deserves all the praise that he got. He got tons and tons of critics awards from this, deservingly.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a great ensemble, and I think that's something Schrader has always been really good at, and really strong at. You know, for someone who has wrestled with like not having a budget and not having studio support for like decades and decades of his career, like the majority of his career, he's just had no budget. He's figured out how to work around things, whether it's visually, or whether it's with a cast, or whether it's with scope. And I think all those tips and tricks are something you don't really get with modern filmmakers, for good or for worse. I don't know. I guess up to you. But I think they're all on display here for sure.
And I just say too, back to Amanda Seyfried, I think she's fantastic, and I really admire her career as well. So, like, I first came across her, I think it was on Veronica Mars. I think she was the the first season, the case that they were following through the whole first season. I think she was the dead girl, and anyway, but she has really. She's really become a very special actress to me, and I like how she'll choose a big project and a small project, but this does seem to be a little bit of a turning point for her, because right around here she also does Twin Peaks, First Reformed, Anon, which I really like, which is by Andrew Nicolò.
Oh no,
Andrew Nicolò.
Oh yeah,
and Andrew Nicolò
with Clive Owen. No,
yeah, and I really like it. So like she's in that, and Andrew Nicolò, interestingly, is sort of an Ethan Hawke guy. Ethan Hawke's been 3 or 4 of his films, and that may come back later. Just saying. And what else? And then Mank came shortly after that too. So I think that she was probably sort of secure enough in her career that she can sort of seek out like good, interesting roles, along with ones that paid the bill. So I sort of appreciate her as an artist and someone who's sort of, playing the career game as she is. So yeah, no, I admire her, and she's great in this. Great, like such a good performance, so personable.
Maybe her best performance. I don't know. There's some good ones in there, but definitely up there for her. Yeah, so I think that's going to do it for today's episode. If you want to watch First Reformed, I think we all highly recommend it. It is widely available on streaming and on purchasing, obviously, and renting, all that good stuff. One of the highlights of the film, undeniably, is Ethan Hawke. So for our question of the week, we're asking, what is our favorite Ethan Hawke performance? Randy, take it away. What is your favorite Ethan Hawke performance?
So I pondered this a bit because there are a bunch, and I think he's an underrated performer. I think he's also an underrated writer as well, because he's penned a few things, and I think he's just a solid film guy. So I quite liked him in Good Kill. There's the Andrew Niccol one, and Gattaca, and certainly his Richard Linklater stuff. So I was thinking of maybe answering with Tape. But then I started going through his filmography to make sure I didn't really forget anything. And I'm going to go with Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. I love that film. I love his camaraderie with Philip Seymour Hoffman in that. So yeah, that's probably the one that I'm going to go with, just because I adore that film. His performance is strong in it. And I would say First Reformed is my favorite performance by Ethan Hawke. But I'm going to go with his performance as one of the misfit brothers that robbed their parents' jewelry store in Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. Such a great film.
Nick, what is your favorite Ethan Hawke performance?
I had written down Before the Devil Knows You're Dead.
Oh, shoot.
Because it's so
okay,
good.
I'll say Tape.
No. But there's so many. It's an embarrassment of riches. I was going to make a joke. I'm not going to make any jokes. No, I think one that's in a movie that's not necessarily a great movie is problematic, especially nowadays as we've grown as a society. But I really love him in Predestination, the sci-fi time travel movie. But also, no, it has to be for me one of the Linklater films, and I would say it's a toss-up. I would have gone with Boyhood, but I haven't seen it in forever, and I've been meaning to rewatch it recently. So I will actually go with Before Sunset. I think Before Sunrise has the youthful, jovial. It's we're in love. Let's just do this, do that. Before Midnight has the harsh realities of what it means to be in a long-term marriage with someone. I think Before Sunset, he just captures, together with Judy Delphi, this feelings of regret, of longing. As someone said, I think we were talking about this recently on an episode of Anatomy and Adaptation with Hilary, where the best acting is when you're not trying to show the emotions you're feeling. And there's so many moments in that where you can just tell he's smiling his way throughout. I think Ethan Hawke has a wonderful smile. It's so just heartwarming, and you can see that he uses it as a weapon to shield his true feelings. And all those moments in the film are oh, I love it. I think it's just a perfect 80-minute film, and I think he is magnificent in it.
So to be clear, I've never seen Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. I need to watch it.
You do.
I think the answer is probably just Before Sunset. I agree with you, Nick. But I'll also throw out Waking Life. I think he's really great in that film. That's a great project. I think overall doesn't get talked about that much. As well as First Reformed. I mean, obviously he is fantastic here. A great filmography to pick from, and making interesting moves as a director and writer. I think a lot of people are overlooking some of his directorial stuff. There's some good stuff in there for sure. With that, so you can let us know your thoughts on Twitter or on email at home. Let's get to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't talked about on the podcast. I'll start quickly. I finally saw Presence in the theater. I was excited to watch this from Soderbergh. An interesting concept, a haunted house movie from the perspective of the ghost. It's kind of half a ghost story, half in a violent nature. Can't say it was overly interesting or engaging, but it's also only 80 minutes, so you can easily get through it. And there are some just great cinematography moments, but also just some interesting, clever thoughts where it plays around with that idea. I like Sonnenberg having fun, so even if the film doesn't necessarily hit it out of the park, I'll always be there to support him. I finally watched School of Rock from Linklater. Surprisingly fun. I thought I was going to hate it. I was really prepared for this to be like a flop. I think Jack Black is quite fun here. Definitely predictable.
Classic.
Mike White, baby. Mike White.
But yes, Mike White is also great here. And then finally, one that not a lot of people talk about, but they really should. The Birdcage is absolutely hysterical. Robin Williams. Boy, he is giving a performance I never thought I'd see him give in this one. Just really, really enjoyable film. If anyone's looking for a really camp queer comedy, this is one I would easily recommend. I'm surprised more people are not talking about it. It feels like one that probably should have blown up a little bit more by now, but alas, here we are. Randy, what have you seen this week?
All right. Well, firstly, at some point, months and months down the road, as over on Gems, we're talking about Mike Nichols. The Birdcage is on the lineup, and so we'll have to have you over, Carson, to talk about that. Okay, what have I watched? I watched Winter Light, sort of in preparation for this, and also to sort of help myself walk into the world of Bergman. So many blind spots in that man's filmography. So I watched Winter Light. I had seen it before, but I was happy to go back and watch that again. Great film, just a great character study about this, this minister, this reverend who's sort of doesn't see God in his life anymore. So absolutely fantastic. I also watched from Bergman The Silence, which is these two sisters, and one of them has a child, and they just sort of hole up in a hotel and live, and it's just sort of a portrait watching the kid walk around the halls and sort of interact with the porter that works there, and interact with the seemingly the only other people in the hotel, like this troupe of acting dwarves. But the sisters are they're sort of polar opposites in a way, and they don't communicate well, and it's just a fascinating portrait just to see these female characters sort of struggle with their sexuality, and also you're in this world where you look at the window and it seems to be a war-torn small town, but you never really know what's going on. So all you ever have to deal with is the humanity. And I found it fascinating. I'd love to go just sort of watch it again. And a lot of Bergman stuff is conveniently an hour and a half. So it's just great. I also watched Speak No Evil with James McAvoy. Came out last year. Quite liked it. Thought it was
fun film.
Good little thriller. I have these questions about how were they able to travel to Italy with this child, but at any rate, I didn't let that disrupt my enjoyment of it. I figured that with the UK
Trains.
Not in the EU anymore, how exactly are they? Anyway, I don't want to get into spoilers, but that was sort of a fun little ride. And I also checked out Woman of the Hour, which I also liked, the Anna Kendrick directorial debut, and neat little film. I thought insofar as that, there are a lot of films that are sort of covering, misogyny and this type of thing. I thought this stood aside from a lot of those sort of normal themes of how terrible men are, and was able to focus on the way some women survive these horrible altercations. So that I found that there was a neat focus on coping and survival that was part of that. Thought it was a strong directorial debut and sort of a quirky story in its own way. And Kendrick is fairly charming. I find her a charming performer. So that was a fun watch, and that is about it.
Some good viewing. Nick, what have you seen this week?
I've seen very little. It's been a busy week with work. But what I did manage to watch, I went to an exhibit with a friend of mine, and we managed to, surprisingly, there were two exhibits of Marco Brambilla, who is a video artist who makes this, they're called like a megapixel series of videos, which are 3-4 minute loops that are these giant widescreen shots made up of rotoscoped GIFs of popular films it's an overwhelming experience. That's the most I can say. One of them is like flexing Arnold Schwarzenegger, portrayed kind of like as a god figure silhouetted in the background, with thousands of like ladies dancing from various movies and whatnot. It's insane. So it's not a film per se, but that was great. Um, I did watch the Abel Ferrara documentary Napoli, 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 which is very interesting. I think it works best when it's just the documentary on Naples, focusing on the convicted felons, their experiences, why they're imprisoned, what did they do wrong, and just kind of like painting this potentially problematic for people from actual Naples, but still an interesting portrait of the city back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Uh, Juror number two, finally watched it. It's fucking amazing. It's just like a real good movie with the capital M. It's like those are like people used to make movies that look like this, that had just really good acting like that. We took them for granted. They were a dime a dozen in the 80s and 90s. Nowadays, they're barely made anymore by studios. It's so good. Just so good. I don't know if any of you have watched it. I think you did, Carson. Did you watch it, Randy?
No.
100% up your alley.
Cool. Yeah.
100%. Great film. Loved it. On the same day, I found out they were screening Fire Walk with Me in a cinema. In Berlin, there's multiple celebrations in honor of David Lynch. I'm watching Eraserhead tomorrow, Blue Velvet 2 days from now, and 3 days from now, Wild at Heart. I'm missing, sadly,
Nice.
Elephant Man because it was screening at this time. And I was like, no, podcast. Carson's celebration is his birthday. Elephant Man can wait another time. But no, watching Fire Walk with Me, it felt genuinely special on this massive screen. It was overwhelming. I left the screening shaken to my core. I could barely walk, literally. I couldn't even put like earbuds in my ears because I knew I would have probably collapsed. It was just that impactful and that powerful. And lastly, today, right before our screening, our conversation. I managed to go to a screening of The Brutalist on glorious 70mm VistaVision film, and it was fantastic. I will consider it just for the sake of it because I hate those movies that come out in January. They're like, is it 2024? Is it 2025? This time I'm doing it. This and Nosferatu, they're both 2025 films for me. And Brutalist for sure will be up in the top five at the end of the year. People have said monumental. It's a cliche, but accurate, long film, beautiful. Um, a propulsive score that I instantly fell in love with. Adrian Brody is magnificent. Guy Pearce has never been more detestable in his life. Really loved Felicity Jones as well. Great supporting cast. But it's just a very timely story, I think, considering all the conversations we have about the nature of art and creating art and the immigrant experience, like going abroad, looking for a better life, a better opportunity, the dream, of the migrant, of going to the States or even going to anywhere else. Could be the UK, could be Germany, could be wherever, only to realize that no one actually wants you there. If you're good, maybe they want your work, but other than that, they're tolerating you. That's one of the many brutal lines in the film. They're just tolerating you because you're doing what needs to be done. Um, and it very powerfully equates capitalism to fascism in a way where the people with the money control everything. They controlled you on a literal sense, outside of a monetary sense. Quite shocking in one part, I'm not going to lie. People who've seen it know what I'm talking about, but not gratuitous. Just I don't know, like it was 3.5 hours, and I felt like it could have gone for another half hour. I would not have felt it, to be honest. I was just that into the film. So high praise for The Brutalist.
Absolutely, a great film. So with that is going to do it for today's episode. Where can we find everyone online, Nick?
You can find me on Letterboxd, Instagram, and Blue Sky, Nicolò97 or Nicolò Grasso. It's very easy to find. And you can follow my podcast, Anatomy of an Adaptation, officially back, officially full in swing. New episodes are dropping like flies now, baby. So yeah, go Anatomy of Adaptation Pod or go on YouTube at Enjoy the Movies to check it out.
Randy?
Cool. You can check me out on Uncut Gems Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Our website is www.uncutgemspodcast.com. And in January, we just finished a month talking about amazing Peter Berg films. And we're starting February talking about Antoine Fuqua. So we're going to talk about Mr. Fuqua all month. We have a Patreon as well, so you can check us out there. And we have a David Lynch marathon for people to check out, which Nicolò hosted actually. And I mentioned that this year we're going to be talking about Mike Nichols once a month. So there's that. As for me, I do a bit of writing. You can find my column, Isle of Films, on Jakob's website, flashonfilm.com. And you can also just find me kicking around on Letterboxd at Bratch7 and on Twitter and Blue Sky at Randy Burrows.
Awesome. And you can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. You can find me on Twitter, but I don't post there, so why would you? With that, thank you so much for listening and watching. We'll be back next week to talk about Makoto Shinkai's Weathering with You. So see you then. Goodbye.